afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Raising Excellence, one of the most important hours of your day. I'm Michael, the Opportunity Ambassador and MC for today, and today's show is is sorry, inspecting your default setting and how to change them. Let's
Oh,
meet our other host, Agnieszka, our psychosomatic illuminator.
hi. I just realized I put the wrong title on the podcast, so I'm going to change it now, but nice to be here.
And Willow, our trauma consultant.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here tonight.
And if you're viewing live, feel free to ask questions or comments. Please do so, and we'll try and get with you and answer your question or comment. With that said, let's turn it back over to Willow, and she's going to lead us through our part two of this introduction to trauma.
So, hi again to everyone. I wanted to thank you for joining us on the second night of Trauma Uncovered. The concept that I wanted to explore this evening was what are the different trauma responses? There's many different kinds, and we often focus on just like the main ones that seem really obvious. And I'm gonna try and like shed a little bit of light on the specific responses and see what other experiences maybe y'all have had too. Um, let's see. I just realized that we didn't talk about when to put the slides up, or not slides, but the pictures.
Well, you're going to tell me. There's one, two, three.
So, the first, actually, go ahead and put the fight, flight, and freeze up.
All right.
Probably best to start with what everyone already
Oops, that's not
knows. Common ground.
There we go. I got the right slide up. I'm a successful person.
Awesome. All right. So these are the three main ones that people usually encounter, and the ones that we all know. So I added a couple of little what are they called? Modifiers,
Descriptors.
Descriptions, I think, would be better.
Descriptions. Okay. So under fight, usually irritability, loss of temper, and defensiveness. Those are some good indicators. That's the word I was looking for. Indicators that you are in a fight situation, which usually means when you're encountered with a threat, you are ready to face it. You're not going to back down, and you're going to find some way to defend yourself, whether it be intellectually, physically, or however you decide to defend yourself. You're ready to defend. The next one is flight, and some indicators of this is avoidance, finding excuses for things, consistently not going to this place or not wanting to have that feeling, anxiety about said this is why you avoid things, because you have anxiety when you encounter them in your mind, and fear, living in a constant state of fear. It's hard to separate if you have been in a traumatic incident, and like a women in sexual assault, often you can be walking down the street and you'll misinterpret a strange move that they do as like threatening to you, and you it's often hard to separate the fact that your brain and your body see a signal that is causing you to have this reaction, when in reality you are not actually in danger. But a lot of people just live in a constant state of fear, and they'll blame it on there's so much violence in the world, when actually we are living in the safest period of time that the world has ever seen. And like a gun crime, so be like, well, gun person on person gun violence is at its lowest rate since I think the 1990s, and it is still going downhill. But it's hard to like separate that the fear is something that I can pinpoint a lot of good hardcore examples for like how that manifests in your behavior. The third one is actually less known, and I like a different word for it. If you say freeze and that's what fits right for you, feel free to use freeze. I like to say posturing because it kind of like gets you ready. You either freeze or you just like kind of hibernate, you endure. You're getting ready to deal with something for an extended period of time. Some indicators of that are feeling numb. So you will feel emotionally numb, and some oftentimes you can feel physically numb. You can have dead zones on your body, or you can just like generally, if someone puts something into your hand and you have your eyes closed, sometimes you won't be able to tell what that is because you're part of your whatever they're your nerves are not necessarily connected to your brain at that point. They're not talking, they're not communicating to each other. So you don't actually know what you're feeling. That's a indication of being numb. Feeling detachment. So detachment from like, the general not interest in things, but detachment from people. You'll find yourself isolating and you will find yourself giving up very easily, like almost all the time. Any encounter you come to, any frustration you have, you're just like, I'm going to give up. I'm going to go, you know, do my thing, but I'm just going to give up on that task. So that was the first three. I come across another one that was fawning, which I had a picture, but the writing is way too small and it's only one section of it. So I just will, I wrote down what that one was. So some indications of fawning are people pleasing, like consistent people pleasing they cannot say no to other people, and they tend to talk about others instead of themselves. Like you'll notice you have a conversation with them and you're like, how are you doing, and they'll be like, okay, I'm fine. Yeah, how are you doing, even though like they didn't say really anything about themselves. You'll find that a lot, and even especially when they decide to open up about themselves, they will quickly change the subject. Like, I have talked enough about me, it's your turn now, and they will just like direct the conversation to you. That's another indicator. uh Another one that I thought was really important was they flatter others to avoid conflict. And let's see. Oh yeah, the last one that was really important is people who an indication of fawning is if you are like majorly concerned with your social standings and like acceptance and fitting in. So often the greatest thing about this picture was it had labels. It said you're often mislabeled um, psychologically through your therapist or your doctor as being codependent or victim mentality if you are prone to fawning.
My comment in regard to this is it's interesting that this one is the least known, but is probably the most utilized because I tend to believe that this is really like where like the military, for example, when they talk about shock and awe, what they want to do is kind of get people in this fawning stage, just like blow their mind and then just take everything as quickly as possible, win the battle, win the war before people even know what's going on, but essentially put them in this particular stage. And then when you look at like what's going on at the moment, I would say I would describe most people as being in this particular frame of mind because they don't know what else to do. They're just going along. They're all just moving into their houses and saying, okay, we're under house arrest. That's what we should do. And they don't want to question what what is actually going on. And I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think it was labeled as Stockholm syndrome in the past, right? The phoning thing. Wouldn't that be the same thing as Stockholm syndrome?
I would assume so. Well, I think Stockholm syndrome is, and I'll have to do more research, but from what little I know, I think that Stockholm syndrome is the result of consistent, like so complex post traumatic stress disorder is being under stress all the time. Like your body is still just under stress. It's very complex. it's a symptom of being under, like, of dealing with, it's actually a symptom of dealing with fight, flight, and often, fight and flight, deal with that. And then freezing and posturing has a lot to do with your mental dissociative issues. And fawning, I think, probably would definitely lead into Stockholm syndrome. So that's why I really wish that I could like blow up this picture, because it was just, it laid it out so clearly. And it's what I usually help people with is complex post traumatic stress disorder. It encompasses almost every single one of the mental illnesses that are being treated by psychiatrists and psychologists, these days, and usually being treated with medication. And I I don't advocate for any medication. Like, I also don't advocate for you to stop your medication. Please do not take that as, I am
At least
adamantly,
not immediately. Kind of
yeah,
drift
because that
off
can
of
be
it slowly.
dangerous. That can be very, very dangerous. Um, so, all right, the fight mentality. It says that it's typically mislabeled as narcissistic, sociopathic, and conduct disorder. Which conduct disorder was really interesting because there's a lot of behavioral, like
Sorry.
explosive, intermittent explosive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. All those are conduct disorders. They're behavioral issues. Actually, most of my clients, whenever I was working in a group home, had some sort of conduct disorder, and they were also
Well,
prone to fighting.
we're talking about the DSM diagnosis, right?
Yes.
Or identification of a disorder. And, of course, I think the DSM has been one in which it's, I think about 30 or 40 years ago, it was like 60 pages long, and now it's like 500 pages and has a heck of a lot more disorders than it did then. And in those days, it listed things like homosexuality as a mental illness, whereas today it's, you know, uh, what do you call this, conduct disorder? It's
Actually,
Homosexuality
I'm
is
not
not
sure.
a
I'm not
disorder.
sure if it is classified. I know it used to be,
Sorry,
but
no, it's not.
I think they took that out. Um, and my problem is labeling it as, like, I get it if it's causing problems, calling it a disorder, but if we stopped calling them disorders and we started saying these are the symptoms, these are symptoms of
Well, you can't
something
say that
wrong.
about homosexuality. It's just a thing, right? It either is or isn't.
Well, I'm just saying is that I think they were wrong about the mental disorder of people's sexual choices, just like they're wrong about people's conduct. you know, if
Yeah.
people don't agree with you, that doesn't mean that it's a disorder. And if they vehemently disagree with you, that isn't a disorder either. But
True.
these are things that could indicate trauma, obviously.
Yes. uh yeah, I was gonna say, like, they're under flight. They it says that they typically mislabel a lot of the flight symptoms as OCD, bipolar, ADHD, panic disorders, and mood disorders. And I know there's a lot of anxiety disorders. And this is just actually what's in the DSM-5, DSM-6.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I don't think that like homosexuality would be a good indication because it's not even in there, so you have nothing to verify it against all these other ones. Uh, but let's see. Oh yeah, the other one, freeze, was typically mislabeled as clinical depression, schizophrenia, ADD, and dissociative identity disorder. Yeah, and we already talked about how the fawning is typically mislabeled as like codependent and victim mentality. Um, but the more interesting part about it was that most people have about one or two. They pick like one or two of these reactions, and whenever their perceived threats come into play, they revert back to these. stages, and then their bodies produce the chemicals associated with these stages because uh, fight, it's clear. If you see someone and you're really threatened and you have to, like, you're gonna have to fight, you might get a spike of adrenaline. It's gonna fuel your system to, like, do something. You also might get a spike of adrenaline to run. So it kind of depends on which uh, program your brain is kind of like going on. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to use this burst of energy to do this. I'm going to use burst of energy to that. And if those don't work, then I'm going to create like morphine in my brain, and I'm going to freeze. I'm going to constrict my entire body to, like, just deal with this. And I actually don't know what chemicals are produced or secreted during fawning, because that one's such a newly recognized symptom. There's not as much to go on.
So how can we change our default settings? Like, what if those settings serve us?
Well, now would be a good time to show the trauma symptoms. So I have a diagram that shows trauma at the center and all of the different symptoms.
There we go. Got it.
And the best thing to do would be to identify when you're having these reactions to things. It's really difficult. You have to, like, I hate to be that person. It's like, you need to, like, take care of yourself, eat, sleep, take care of yourself in that way, like, be nutritional, exercise your body, meditate. But in reality, you really do need to do those things because you need to know what your baseline is. And if you have been in a traumatic experience, especially if you have been in extended traumatic stress, you're going to realize that you don't have your baseline is probably like a mixture of like 2 or 3 of these different symptoms. And then when you start realizing, like, just the other day, I was telling a client to be careful when you're in a dysregulated state. And that's what actually, Mike, you had mentioned the Crappy Childhood Fairy. She's on YouTube. Anybody who watches should go definitely check her out. I love her stuff. She talks about being regulated and dysregulated. And regulated is, we'll get to the picture later, is when you are feeling calm and compassionate and curious about the world, and you're able to socially engage on a mutual level, like you're not in fight, flight, freeze. Kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. Good time to take a drink.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very interesting because this particular picture definitely demonstrates a lot of things that I think most people experience at some point or another. Certainly, things like they label it as substance abuse, but I would say that addictive behavior is one in which a lot of people fall into. You know,
It's like a coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism.
It is.
And,
this is a breathing regulation. As soon as Agnieszka pointed that out to me, it made it so much easier because it helps me breathe. I actually hold my breath. This is a physical part of it. Sorry, I didn't mean to take over. This is a physical manifestation.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's allergy season. When you're really stressed, especially me, my body will constrict and I will hold my breath and I will not breathe, and that will make me more panicked. And I realized that I used to chew gum, and then I started smoking cigarettes. And then when I quit smoking cigarettes, I started on the vape. And then when I don't have my vape, I am drinking out of a water bottle that has this type of sucky straw
Oral fixation lid.
But it's a breathing because I will drink, and then once I am done drinking, I will exhale. And then it's a breathing. I watch myself do it, but it wasn't until I was able to, sit and be like, okay, what am I doing? What is my regular routine? What do I do all the time?
So if we do some little Freudian psychology, were you breastfed?
I don't remember. I want to say yes. But also, I had a very, according to stories from my mother, I had a father who did not, he did believe that coddling a child was coddling, that it would spoil a child and cause a um, needy child. So I'm sure that that probably, when I read The Body Keeps the Score, there was a section about attunement between mothers and children under the age of 2, and it accounted for most of the disassociation symptoms uh, that this particular psychologist had seen. It was incredible.
Yeah, well, I mean, judging by this list of traumatic characteristics, I think everybody can clearly see that everybody is, as we described yesterday, walking wounded. They're walking around with all kinds of trauma, and we're dealing with that. And then I definitely think, the powers that be take advantage of this. The marketing, the sales approach, they're all appealing to these kind of traumatic things, and then they're offering some kind of resolution to them that isn't really the resolution, but sounds good.
Yep. Diabetes, one of our listeners is saying that's a possibility as well as a response. Because diabetes, according to Louise Hay, Heal Your Body, it's all about savoring the sweetness of life and rejoicing in the sweetness of life. And so if that's dysregulated, then diabetes occurs.
So I'd like to clarify that it's not the trauma that actually causes the diabetes. I'm not saying that.
It's the reaction to the trauma.
The chemicals. So when you are in fight and flight and you're producing adrenaline and you are like pushing your body on adrenaline, years down the road, you might develop adrenal fatigue, meaning that system is done. It's tired. It's wore out. You've maxed it out. And I'm not going to say there's a bunch of illness, like physical illnesses, that we don't know where they come from. We don't know what causes cancer. We don't know what causes diabetes. We don't know what, half these things that we're being treated for are actually caused by.
Wow.
And what's to say it's not that we have a chemical imbalance, but that a chemical balance is a symptom of the chemicals that we are excreting when we are under stress.
Yeah.
As a psychosomatic therapist, I believe that everything comes from the interpretation of what's in front of us. There's psychological, the emotional, the psychological assault, the emotional response, the toll, that like the suffering, the continual cortisol, like when we're continuing, like when we get into an amygdala hijack, where the frontal lobe is not working so well, and we continue to think about the trauma or the danger, or the whatever perceived danger that's about to happen or is happening to us. When that happens, the body releases all sorts of chemicals, and being on those chemicals for a sustained amount of time can actually cause damage. I don't think that's recognized in Western medicine, allopathic medicine, very often, but there's a dog walking around my house.
On the call the other day, somebody was talking about a pain in their foot, and you said, "Show me your foot," and they pointed to where the pain was on the foot, and you said, "Oh, that's your heart shot," or that's what did you say?
Yeah, it was where the solar plexus and the heart meet. That's where it was. So
a little bit more on that. If you're into anything, like I wasn't not to say I'm like a believer now or anything, but like I was very skeptical. I'm like, I don't understand how this works, but I looked up on a website, and if anyone's interested, I can link it in the show notes. Or do we have show notes? I think we have show notes.
Yeah, we have.
That's what I hear people say on podcasts. So I was like, oh, I should like throw that in. Sound all like
professional
cool.
And shit.
I hope that was correct.
Sort of.
But it's a signal. It's supposedly a sign, and it's a vibration. So I have told Agnieszka that when I've gotten like in tune with my body, and I know I'm just listening to what's going on, and I don't try to interpret it. I just be like, all right, I have a weird vibration in the sole of my foot, and it's always my right foot. And I get it at really coincidental.
Specific.
coincidental, strangely coincidental times. And yeah, that was what I was pointing out. And apparently, it's a signal that means the time ahead of you is going to be really difficult, but it's going to work out, and it's gonna like you should keep going. So it's a good sign. It's like, hey, prepare yourself.
Well, it's no, it's more like apprehension as to is about to happen. So it's not necessarily going to be difficult, but you're already thinking it is.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? For
But it doesn't really
psychosomatics,
matter why.
anyway.
Does
Yeah,
it really
either way,
matter
it's pretty
why
much
it's difficult? It's going to be difficult. And I got this feeling at our meeting when I was getting ready for this, and I was like, I don't show it really well because I really don't like to just let people know when I'm feeling like that. But I was really, really nervous to start this because I don't like. Here's my problem. I like being the center of attention, but I don't like making an ass out of myself. So that's really hard when you're starting out and you're like, you have to like fall a couple of times. I'm not good at failing. I don't like it. And actually, that's one of the symptoms of, let's see, where is it? I think it's posturing. I wrote everything really quickly and like really, oh yeah, okay. It is under freezing and posturing. So some of the symptoms of that are spacing out, feeling unreal, isolating the self from the world, being a couch potato, disassociating, brain fog, difficulty making decisions, and then acting on your decisions, which is definitely something I struggle with, and achievement phobia. Yeah. And I realized that many years ago when I was much younger, and I was like, yeah, I'm terrified of failing and proving people right, so I just don't try sometimes. Where I'm like, I know I can do that. I don't have to prove it to anyone.
Well, I certainly think that if you look at this particular one, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn one, and the characteristics. I mean, man, you see a lot of these things going on, and you know, the question I have is, I mean, these are almost conditioned responses in some ways. I mean, the fact that we're seeing more and more of these, especially in the freeze and fawn area, and that they're being labeled as ADHD and OCD and stuff like that. And then once people kind of adopt an idea that, well, that's just their sickness, or that's just a disease that they have, now they're just accepting themselves as being, a victim of trauma, or essentially they're a victim of trauma that can't be cured, but it is just trauma that's being,
I think
you know
it's I think it's even scarier than that because here if you believe that your words actually have a physical effect on like your reality and your body, and a lot of people do, I particularly do. Um, if you're being told that you have this illness because of your genetics, you are a victim of your genetics. Mentally, how you process that is you have bad genetics and you are a victim of your own genetics. Like you're a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. And it only it digs the hole deeper and deeper and isolates the person even worse. It's
well,
actually it's really dangerous, I think. There's a
yeah,
lot
well,
of
imagine a
theories.
person that's wounded, and essentially they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, you're doing it to yourself. You wounded yourself. You're just meant to be wounded.
That's not how that goes. You wounded yourself. How can you get out of it? Here are
Yeah, well,
seven ways.
that's what the current medical system is taking advantage of that in a lot of ways.
Well, because whether it's psychological or genetic, you still wounded yourself. The conclusion is still the same. If it's emotional trauma that causes you suffering, then it's still the responsibility is still on you. And I'm not saying blame, I'm saying responsibility. So that's totally different, right? So taking that responsibility upon yourself and go, okay, so, I have this issue. I have arthritis in my fingers. What can I do for it? And trying all the 20 different things you can do for it just to see what works and what doesn't, right? That's
Well,
taking
I just
responsibility.
think the odds of success of a person actually overcoming this particular issue goes down tremendously when an authority figure basically tells them, no, that's just who you are.
But you know what? No, no. Let's take it for logic, right? Because doctors are very well educated and they have a lot of knowledge in their head, right? But they have
Sort of.
15 minutes with you. So in 15 minutes, this doctor is supposed to discern what the issue is, where it came from, how you can fix it, and all of that. That's asking a lot. Even if he was a genius, that's still asking a lot.
Here's
Yeah, but I don't even
my
think,
here's my
I don't even,
counter argument to that. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
The allopathic doctors, part of their regiment for learning the information that they're regurgitating to you is sleep deprivation, which is it does the same thing. So
That's
Oh,
not really a counter argument. That's a pro argument. You just repeated what I said. They can't possibly make up their
oh
mind.
yeah, true. Sorry.
They can't
Redundant
possibly
argument.
assess you accurately on the basis of a 15-minute episode, especially since my experience going to the doctor, it's always a fresh start. They never remember you the second time you show up.
well,
So it's like, what's your name?
in a lot of cases, and now with computerization, they're essentially they're with a tablet there, and they're asking you questions and like pushing the buttons that say A, B, C, or D, and the computer is diagnosing it.
So pretty soon idiocracy will happen. They won't know how to
Exactly.
pronounce. You have diabetes. Diabetes. That's what the computer says.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the doctor wants to get paid, and so he wants to, so that's why he's using the computer, is because he knows he doesn't know what the insurance company is going to pay for, but that's what he wants. He
But you
wants
know
to
what's
get paid.
funny? Every other practitioner gives you an hour, like a massage therapist, a kinesiologist, an osteopath. Everybody gives you
A
an hour.
psychologist.
Some people even give you an hour to get to know you, and then this treatment starts in the second hour, right? And some people even give you a free hour to get to know you, and then the treatment starts. The only people who don't give you that kind of time are allopathic doctors and lawyers.
Bend over.
And I'm not saying that because I don't like them. I'm just observing reality.
Well, it's interesting that they don't take the time to establish a trust. They just assume that you trust them. Interesting behavior, huh?
You're supposed to trust them. But as a practitioner, like when I was doing massage or things like that, I would get to know the client, the customer, the patient, whatever, just because I want to have rapport with the person I'm about to treat. Not because I think that they'll trust me more, because if they're in my office, they already trust me to a certain extent, right? But yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that allopathic doctors are mostly just purveyors of more trauma. I've been recently quite enraged, which I'm not really sure because, and I don't have any children, but about these stories of mothers of newborns who their infants are being like isolated from them and not allowed skin to skin contact, and all the holistic doctors and postpartum, you know, all the midwives and doulas and any birth practitioner is like absolutely not. If they're already exposed to it through the blood of their own, the blood placenta, I can't remember the terminology, but they had all the terminology of like how it passes through, how the antibodies are made in the breast milk, and how actually it's safer for them to do that, and the psychological detriment of like not allowing them skin to skin contact and keeping them away from their mothers, because their bodies will secrete stress hormones when they're not with their mother, because they don't know that a predator doesn't have them. They don't know. They're like, my mother is not here. Where is my mother? Secrete stress hormones. So from birth, how many children have been rushed out of the room without skin to skin contact, the boy is circumcised, and then brought back hours later to be like, oh, here's your baby. It's traumatized. Hopefully you
It's
can
already
calm it down.
got a big chip on its shoulder. Yep.
So like people want to be like, oh, I was raised in a perfectly wonderful home, and I'm like, you may have been, you may have wonderful, loving, caring parents, but that doesn't mean that our system isn't churning out trauma like
Every
I
turn
don't
of the
know,
way.
vitamins, like
from
vitamins.
from
Seconds
second
from birth,
zero.
and they were already stacking up the traumas.
Well, and that whole thing with slapping the baby, like, is that really necessary?
I've
No.
heard that it's not.
It just sounds like
I
more of the
actually
same, right?
I heard a strange. I heard a. It was an article from one of these. It was a post traumatic, or not sorry, postpartum holistic renegade birth page on Facebook, and it's a wonderful group that like this lady travels around and she, she talks about birth and she said there's a topic that not many birth practitioners talk about is how there are certain babies who like seem to wait. Like they're there, they're healthy, they're alive, they're breathing, but they haven't decided to talk yet. They haven't let out that, I am here scream. And she talked about this most recent one about how all the mom and the dad were talking to the baby and he just was, he didn't respond. And by all other measures, he checked out healthy and fine, but he just hadn't made a sound. And his little sisters, or his older sisters, sorry, his older sisters started talking to him and saying, "We love you. We really can't wait to meet you." And all of a sudden, he was just like, "Hi, I'm here." And it was like it's like this baby was waiting. So I don't think like I think they come in their own time. They decide to respond to you and the environment that they are just like they were literally pulled out of a nice warm snug environment where they didn't have to worry about anything, and now all of a sudden they're cold and they're probably hungry and they've never been hungry before. They're probably like, what is going on in the world? And some of them are just like, I don't know. No. I mean, imagine how you feel when someone walks into your room and they rip off your covers and they're like, wake up, turn the light on. You're like,
Slap
no,
you.
no, go away. I
All
imagine
right.
that's
Well,
how they feel. Sorry.
well, we're talking about default settings though, and
How to
how we're going
reset
to
them.
reset them. So let's focus on. So we've got these default settings. Let's talk about that. A lot of the things that happen to us in a traumatic situation are kind of automatic, right? And those are things that really the our brain doesn't control. I mean, there's parts of our brains that control it, but they're on autopilot, and so what our responses are not necessarily really our own choices. But then a lot of people have problems with that auto response, like if they fawn in a particular situation, or if they run in a particular situation, and then they feel ashamed because they did that particular thing, and they can't, but they think that's who they are. So let's talk a little bit about that.
The best advice I can give someone is no matter how uncomfortable it is, do your best to make an effort to show up and try to do something. Uh, I
Like what?
encountered this. Oh, I encountered this in jiu-jitsu. I was getting into the drill really well, and my foot came across, and I kicked someone in the face, and my whole body instantly curled up into fetal position, and my face was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't hurt. Like, please don't hurt me." And he like looked at me, and he's like, "It's okay. We get kicked in the face here. Like this is you're on a mat. I have a mouth guard. That's why I have a mouth guard." And then I was like, "Oh, that must have been a triggered reaction." And after I realized when I identified and labeled that as there's nothing to be afraid of here, and I is still afraid, I was able to say, "Oh, I do this all the time. I do this whenever I go into like my position. I won't attack people. I feel really uncomfortable attacking someone, and if I do it, I instantly feel really, really bad. Like, ooh, sorry." Even though that's what you're. I mean, they're literally telling me, "Attack me, attack me. It's okay. Um, you can start to identify these routines, and then you decide whether you're going to self-soothe. If it's too much, if that reaction is too intense, you need to take care of yourself. You don't need to push yourself. You need to like take it back to another level. I think now would be a good time to show the um, trauma process image.
Oh, it's not this one. It's this one. Nope, that's not it. This
The one
one.
with the green, the red, and the freeze.
I can never get the right one the first time.
That's okay.
I got it.
Awesome. So the bottom of this graph shows the area where you are regulated. It is your, they have it labeled social engagement, but it's where you feel joy, you're in the present, like you're actually grounded, um, and you approach things with curiosity and openness, compassion, and you're actually able to use logic. You're mindful, actually. Uh, so if you are triggered, usually we fluctuate between being triggered into like small amounts of fight flight, and that's when we get like irritable with friends, and someone says something and you snap at them, but it's not threatening your relationships. It's not actually, this is just normal everyday arguments that seem to happen between miscommunications. When you have a trauma response, you will follow that other line that does that little fun bell shape. Um, and this is where like the fight and flight, they can happen simultaneously for people. They happen all within this area. And yeah, you'll have panic and fear, anxiety and worry, rage, anger, irritation, and frustration. When you start to feel these feelings, ooh, actually, there's actually a whole section on the other side that I didn't notice that explains what part of the body is, or part of the brain is engaged at this time, and what is happening to your what vitals, is that what that is called? You like your blood pressure, your heart
Mm-hmm.
rate, your fuel availability, which is like your adrenaline. um, Now if you can calm yourself, like at this point, you can actually go straight into deactivation. Usually people, if something is resolved, if like the threat goes away, or yeah, basically if the threat goes away, then you will go back into deactivation. Sometimes the threat going away, if there is no actual threat there and you're responding to something like a trigger, would be to self-soothe at that point. But again, the first thing is recognizing when you're in a panicked state or a fearful anxiety, rage, and all of these things, and like where you are. That's why I really liked this graph, because it shows like the escalation of how these emotions come out. So if that's the actually I'm noticing more details about this graph every time I look at it. In the red, it says that's the I can. You can do something about it right at this point. And that's why you're having this reaction, because you're going to try and do something to get out of the situation. You're either going to fight it or you're going to run from it. When you enter the I can't stage, your brain will conserve energy. You will experience helplessness, depression. Your body will numb itself. Your brain will numb itself. You will disassociate the unbearable feeling, and then you usually at that point you're completely immobile. You often, like, this is why it's called posturing, because your body will often revert back to whatever position it found protective in the past, which is often fetal position, because the last place that we felt, this actually ties back into earlier, the last place some people actually felt comfort was in the womb. And even though you can't consciously remember that you felt safe in the womb, your brain and your body does. So your body will be like, I'm going to get as close to this as possible. That's often why taking warm baths helps a lot, because it's that the soothing comfort, and hugs help. It sounds stupid, like, ask for a hug, but there's something about the pressure, weighted blankets also help, that calms your nervous system, which would be your parasympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah, I find this very interesting. Uh, this diagram is certainly very helpful in a lot of different ways. But I think one of the things is because we have like this stress response as humans, we never really deactivate because we've got all these other perceived fears that continually put us in this, you know, uh, traumatized state, right? And people are obviously displaying this kind of behavior all the time, and it is bad for our health because it is doing it's raising our heart rate, it's increasing our blood pressure, it's you know doing the adrenaline stuff, it's shutting down all of our internal organs that like our digestion and stuff like that. So all those things that are just normal aren't normally happening, and so those are being restricted. And it's essentially because we're constantly in this state of stressed trauma, experiencing trauma. And it leads to all kinds of health issues. And it's just it's a tremendous thing that everybody is experiencing, and so few people are doing anything about it, really. I mean, doing anything that really solves the problem, because the standard solution is take some medication or self-medicate in some way or do some kind of coping mechanisms that may somewhat alleviate the problem, or at least our perception of the problem, but it's not actually solving the problem or dealing with the underlying causes of the problem.
So this is a little sneak peek at the next episode. There was a tidbit of information from The Body Keeps a Score about how the human brain, when it is traumatized, it often reacts as, or when it is under stress, and it is continuous stress that cannot. So when you are in the freeze posturing, when your dorsal vagal system nerve is triggered, I lost my train of thought. I guess it didn't need to be said.
Well, Agnieszka, from your point of view, people that are putting a lot of makeup on their face, or they're getting rid of the wrinkles in their eyes and stuff like that, and all the cosmetic appearance stuff that people are so involved with these days, a lot of this is just trying to hide these characteristics that are essentially coming out from their own.
But you can't really hide them. Like, I mean, you can have surgery to remove wrinkles and stuff, but your habitual muscle patterns are still your habitual muscle patterns, and there's nothing that can, like, if I'm doing this all day long, no matter what, like how tight my skin is, I'm still doing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it
Yeah, so
doesn't.
these are things that are revealing who they are, and because the cosmetic industry is essentially saying, no, no, we can erase that.
Yeah, it's just like a
But
guy who says, "I'm gonna come for face reading, but I'm gonna get a haircut first." Well, that's not really gonna change anything.
Or we're lied to about why these things occur. Like we're sold a bunch of wrinkle removing cream, and it's like, huh, I wonder if like maybe we're removing the wrong wrinkles. Like
Well,
no one really gets upset about actually having wrinkles that of where you've laughed, because even if you are 100 years old and you smile, even the wrinkles on your face, it's still beautiful in a way.
yeah.
Like it still has a like wow impactful thing. People I think often are sold on removing the ones that show what our trauma is, and we're told that that's normal, that that's not trauma lines, that's not actually like an indication that something's wrong, that's normal and you just need to cover it up.
But
well,
it's even worse than that, because what it is, it's like a self fulfilling, self propelling machine, right? So first, you're made to feel bad about looking the way you're looking, whatever is wrong with you, or you're too skinny or too fat or too brown or too white or too, your hair's too long or too short or too curly or too straight. You know, there's 1,000 little things that could be possibly wrong with you. And the marketing industry has analyzed and dissected every single one of your potential flaws in order to hit on those exact flaws that you already identify as you having, right? And then the assault comes in where they're like, oh, you got that flaw, you got that thing, and now we're going to address it like this. And so and then they sell you, 7 wrinkle creams. And you know what? I have not touched a wrinkle cream to my face for like 20 years. And I seem to have less wrinkles than a lot of people who, yeah.
You know, well, as a matter of fact, the I was reading, or I listened to the audiobook "As Man Thinketh," which is James Allen book. And he is one of the things that he says is you cannot hide your thoughts because your thoughts become habits and your habits become circumstances. And essentially what just like what you're saying about the features on the face and the features on the body that reflect what is actually going on, as well as the body keeps the score. It's your actions, it's the things that you do that reveal your mind within. And unfortunately, people are daily revealing that they're traumatized, you know but that's the situation, that's the society is living on this kind of trauma based experience.
Yeah, and the most
And
important
it's
thing is that you take responsibility for your own trauma. It's not my father or my uncle or this person or that person traumatized me. I mean, it is, but it's my responsibility to get myself out of it, to dig myself out of it. And a lot of people are like, so I see, well, I was going to say I see a lot of guys, but in reality, women do this just as much. Saying stuff like, oh, I'm so stupid, and I'm such an idiot, and things like that, right? And they think, oh no, I'm just saying it to myself, nobody's hurt. But there are two problems with that. First of all, it lowers your self-esteem and makes you, it almost like thinking that almost evokes other people saying it. It's somehow on some level, people will say it back to you for whatever reason when you already think it. Not because it's true, but because they pick up on that vibration, especially bullies. Bullies are really have like honed in sense as to what to say to weaken you. And they will grab that one spot, the one thing, and like shoot an arrow into it, right? And the other reason not to say stuff like that to yourself is that when you keep repeating something in your head and you think you're just doing it quietly, and then something happens and you get frustrated or annoyed, and suddenly all the stuff you were thinking comes out of your mouth at somebody else, not at you, at somebody else. So then you're calling your child or your mother or your partner stupid, idiot, or whatever names you're calling yourself. And by the same vein, people who call you an idiot or stupid, that just means that they're already using those words for self-description.
traumatized as well. Well, they're even worse, they're even more painfully traumatized to the point they're suffering, that they want to cause other people suffering, which is really a cry for help. you know So
Yeah.
a lot of these actions, a lot of the things that are going on in the world, are a reflection of what people are actually experiencing in their mind or in their head or in their body. And the outer reflects the inner. Look at the state. Look at where the world is. We got a lot of problems.
Are you quoting the Emerald Tablets now or what?
I don't know.
Natural
Is that
law.
a movie reference?
As within, so without. No, that's not a movie. That's an actual thing. The Emerald Tablets, an artifact.
Okay, sorry.
I
Thought
think
it
there
might
probably
be a
was a movie.
Disney movie or something I missed.
So I was reminded of a variation of it's not even a variation. It's just a gentleman who does IFS, and something he was talking about was people who let. So the idea is that you have all these parts that are your emotions, and then you have self, Self is supposed to be the leader. So we're going to go with those guidelines. And all your parts are centered around self. So it makes sense that they are self centered. Sounds like it makes sense. The hardest thing is understanding that these parts do not care about the people around you. They are self centered. That is their job. They are to be centered around the self and protect it, because that is the only one who is supposed to get the reins. Because these other parts, they don't care about your children, they don't care about your friends, they don't care about anything other than making you comfortable enough that you can survive, that you can
Or
make it,
saving you from danger. Like
or
meeting new
saving.
people is dangerous, so we're gonna save you by making you feel miserable just before you leave. And sometimes, if you're really scared about leaving, they're gonna give you like diarrhea or a coughing fit or something you can't stop, so you couldn't possibly go out. Now you don't even have to feel guilty about it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. But a lot of people don't realize that when these other parts have the reins all the time, when the kid spills the cup of milk or crawls, or not crawls, draws all over the wall, makes a mess of the kitchen that you just cleaned up, or we'll say your friends do this, all of those mean things that, because self is not in control, that part is in control. That part has been telling self all these things anyways. That's when it comes out, because that part has the reins, it has the megaphone, and is controlling the actions. One thing I like to talk about is, we talk about these parts as if they are emotions, and they are. And the actual etymology, they're the Latin root of the word emotion, is emotivere, I believe. I might be mispronouncing. I looked it up earlier, but it means to move outward, to
Hmm.
gain like agency. It's a signal. If you cry, that means someone's probably going to come up to you and be like, "Hey, why are you crying?" If you're angry, it's supposed to be like, someone has crossed my boundary and I'm protecting myself, and someone's supposed to be like, "Hey, why are you so angry? What's going on?" There's signals to our environment and our loved ones to come help us, that we are in need of help. We need something.
Funny you should say that because I was just listening. Sorry, Mike. I have to say this. I was just listening to this woman like like when I was working earlier today and maybe half an hour before the podcast. And she was saying how she got addicted to the drama of being in distress because when she was a child one time she freaked out about something and everybody ran to her rescue and she was like, oh, that works. And then well into her 20s or 30s she was creating this fuss in order for people to run up and rescue her from difficult situations.
Absolutely.
Michael, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to remind everybody we're at that time when it's about time to wrap up. I think there's a lot more information here, and we need to really cover this topic more because, we were talking about default settings and then certainly how to change those. And I don't even think we really got to, what are the methods to change these default settings that we have when we experience trauma.
The reason
And
for that is because I have not been able to find a general enough way that I feel comfortable giving to people, because once you identify what it is and you want to change it, you will. I don't need to give you, like, I can help if you can't think of anything, I can help give you advice, but 9 times out of 10, all my clients, they realize it and they identify it, they put a label to it, and then they decide what they want to do with it from there. So that's why it was really important for me to just be like, this is what this is. This is a label, this is the words to identify what's going on, and once you identify it, that's, you're capable enough.
well, it's interesting. But in a lot of cases, a lot of people run to professionals, and professionals aren't giving people good solutions. And so, in a lot of cases, they're labeled with this as part of them, as something that's it's their personality or who they are, and that is not the case. And certainly, this is something that I think a lot more people need to examine, spend some time with, think about deeply, and consider, because as soon as somebody with a white coat and a couple of letters in front of their name says you got this and you need to take this medication or something, or you need to be injected with something, a lot of people just do what they say and suffer the consequences, unfortunately, and it just continues. But that doesn't have to be the way, and that's why we're talking about changing the default. And with that said, we've got more. We've got more because on Friday or Thursday we're going to be talking about, are we more than dogs in cages? Because in a lot of cases that's what it feels like. But definitely stay tuned for that. That's tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. We have a website which is raisingexcellence.live, and we're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Periscope. For those that are watching live, obviously they know that. And does anybody have anything else to say before we go?
No, we're good.
Nope.
Thank you all. Thanks, audience. Thank you so much for taking the time. We hope you found this very helpful and informing. And we
See you
appreciate
tomorrow.
your time and attention. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.